Thank you, Stephen. It's very good to be here. I started my day on a rib boat in the fjord off of Tromsø, flying across the surface of the water at 35 knots. And it occurred to me as we were doing that if we tried the same thing at 69 degrees north in Canada, we'd have to be in a snowmobile instead of in a boat. We heard on the previous panel about how the weather conditions can be a challenge along the coast of Norway, but none of the oil and gas executives were talking about ice. The North American Arctic and the Eastern Russian Arctic are very different in terms of the challenges that they pose to oil and gas exploration and to shipping. So again, just to make the point, we're at 69 degrees here, and you have trees and no sea ice. We have polar bears at 58 degrees, right? The Northwest Passage last summer was choked with sea ice. Sir John Franklin would not have got through the Northwest Passage in 2018. He would have got through in 2017, 2016, but there's variability and there still is sea ice. And so we had an entire cruise ship industry in the Canadian Arctic that had to change its plans because their small ice-strengthened vessels could not penetrate the central part of the Northwest Passage. And then we have glacial ice. One of the consequences of climate change is that the glaciers are moving more quickly into the oceans. And we have massive glaciers along the western coast of Greenland and along Ellesmere Island that are calving more and more icebergs into the ocean. And so a few years ago, I was sailing through Lancaster Sound, which is part of the Northwest Passage, on a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker. And there was a huge ice island, a piece that had broken off the Petersman ice shelf that was more than 2 kilometers long. And it was calving off thousands and thousands of small pieces of glacial ice, what we call bergy bits or growlers. And they are an intensely dangerous set of threats to shipping. So the Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker was sailing at 2 knots because of all the quite literally pieces of concrete floating in the water that could have punched a hole in an icebreaker had it been sailing at normal speed. So the North American Arctic is different. The Eastern Russian Arctic is different for shipping. Now, in the North American Arctic, because of the protection of the ice, we haven't seen governments investing in infrastructure and services. So in the Canadian Arctic, we only have one deep water port. There's not a single deep water port along the northern coast of Alaska. Compare that to the more than 16 ports along the coast of Russia, many of them in the western Russian Arctic, which benefits, like Norway, from the warming effects of the Gulf Stream. We base our search and rescue helicopters in southern Canada. It takes them more than a day to get to the Northwest Passage. So anyone who's thinking about sailing the Northwest Passage or using it for cargo or for relocating cable-laying ships or icebreakers needs to think about risk and needs the cooperation of the coastal country. Now, you all know that there are legal disputes between the United States on the one hand and Canada and Russia on the other concerning the legal status of the Northwest Passage and the Northern Sea Route. But the practical fact of the matter is that any responsible shipping company is going to want to work with the coastal state, is going to want to have the very best ice forecasting, is going to want to have access to search and rescue, is going to want to have good maritime charts, and so they cooperate. So in 2017, when the Chinese research icebreaker, the Tsulong, the Snow Dragon, wanted to sail through the Northwest Passage, they contacted the Canadian government and asked for help. So my simple point in terms of this panel is that although we're in Norway, and Norway has an awful lot of Arctic shipping, when we talk about the Arctic, be aware that there are different Arctics. And when we talk about shipping, long cargo routes from Asia to the Pacific Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean to Asia to Europe, or Asia to the east coast of North America, that we're aware that these grand voyages through the Northern Sea Route and Northwest Passage are a completely different character from all of the traffic that takes place along this coastline. That's not to belittle the Norwegian situation. What this country has done in terms of Arctic development is amazing, but it is a different Arctic. That's my simple message. And I say this with admiration and not with no sense of condescending to Norway. We need your expertise in the North American Arctic because it is starting to open, but it will be a long and difficult path before it resembles anything like the coast of Norway. Thank you.